Brought to you by BedroomBattlefields.com, this is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. It's the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast, and it's time once again for our question of the month. So throughout March 2024, I was asking you about hobby U-turns that you've made. You know, something that you once believed in the hobby that you changed your mind about. So this episode, we're going to play all the voice feedback that I got. Thank you very much to everyone who submitted. I know I had a wee complaint in a recent episode about getting, I think I only had one in at the time of recording, but fortunately you've stood up to the table, you've came up to the mic, if you like, and we've got lots of great feedback to play for you on this episode. I'll kick us off with David, who got in touch with me to say that he forgot to record his name. Well, the good news, David, on this podcast, we reward and celebrate incompetence. So here's your clip now.
What hobby-related thing have you recently changed your mind about? If I might be so indulged, my answer to this actually harkens back to last month's question about the old world. What's changed, you might ask? Well, I've changed my mind about buying it. When the old world was announced nearly half a decade ago, I was excited for the return of Warhammer Fantasy after its ignominious death during the end times back in 2015. So excited, in fact, I was sure I'd be buying it upon release. Well, in the nearly 5 years since it was announced, I've rediscovered my old minis, old books, and old memories, most of which were rooted in the vibrant and colorful 4th and 5th editions. I've since come to realize that that's where my love of the old world lies. I had both of the new army boxes sitting in my queue when I had something of an epiphany. Why buy, learn, and play a new game when I like the old one perfectly fine? This thought was shortly followed by, why buy, assemble, and paint new minis, particularly on these grotesquely large new bases, when you like the old ones perfectly fine? And I have plenty of them. And that's when I closed my internet browser and went downstairs to my hobby bench for another session with my 30-year-old metal dark elves from Marauder Miniatures. There's nothing at all wrong with dusting off your old books and old minis and playing a quote-unquote dead game. For a game is never truly dead as long as there's someone who loves it enough to play it or paint miniatures for it.
Hello, it's Callum, aka Dr. Spork here. It took me a while to come up with an answer to this. I can be quite stuck in my ways, so finding something that I've changed my mind about was quite tricky. This is something that's changed in my hobby brain since I returned to the hobby a couple of years back. Like most people who collected miniatures in the 90s, my entire hobby revolved around like Games Workshop products, like miniatures, rules, paints, even brushes, everything came from them. When I picked the hobby up again, I still sort of had this kind of in my head and started collecting old miniatures and books that Games Workshop had produced. Gradually, though, like, my eyes have been opened up to this vast array of amazing miniatures and interesting rule sets that the hobby has to offer. And I'm even considering buying some smaller scale models rather than my beloved 28mm. But like now I've realised that Games Workshop's like a tip of an iceberg floating on the surface for everyone to see, but lurking kind of just beneath the water is this vast choice that this amazing hobby has to offer. Anyway, thanks for making me rack my brain to try and figure this one out. And if anyone is interested, they can find me on Mastodon at drspoke@warhammer.social, or look up my 3D models on Cults 3D if you're into 3D printing. And thanks, Matthew, for your amazing podcast. I absolutely loved the audio drama you added to the last episode, and I'm working through the ones that you shared on the Discord. And so far, all of them have been excellent. So thank you for that. Cheers.
Hello. This is Darren calling in from California. For the question of the month, the thing I've changed my mind about has actually just been the last few years, and it's basically going from an RPG player, a lifelong RPG D&D player, to more of a miniatures player. I've always collected and painted minis and always loved it. But now with young kids and all the rest, I've found that the mini painting has become a bigger part of my hobby, and then I've started doing solo miniatures games like Rangers of Shadow Deep, which was what led me to your podcast. And I've tried various board games, mostly solo in the recent years, and really enjoying it. So I changed my mind. I used to think that miniature board games were not so cool, and now I'm super into it. So I love the podcast. I love how to the point it is. So keep it up. Really appreciate it.
Hi, it's Ed from Sussex here. The thing that I've changed my mind about recently in tabletop gaming is around army-sized games. I thought that I would always be more interested, certainly 2 years ago when I first got back into the hobby. I thought skirmish-sized gaming was my bag, no real interest in army-sized gaming. And then the old world came around, and that kind of piqued my interest in terms of rank and flank army games, mostly I think because of the interesting tactical and strategic decisions that you have to make in such a game. Even though I'm not hugely interested in playing that specific game, it did pique my interest. I started investigating what else was out there in that style, and I came across Hobgoblin, which is something that I've gone in on, built an army for, which is pretty cool. It's also then spurred me on to look at some sci-fi, more squad size rather than big army size games. And Xenos Rampant seems really fun, so I'm giving that a go. And for that, I'm able to just use models that I already own, put together a few things into squads. So it's not a huge cost for me, which is always a big consideration. So getting back into army-sized games, which is not something I had thought that I would do, is the thing that I've changed my mind about.
Right, let's hear from James now.
Hello, Matthew. Thank you, as always, for an excellent podcast. I have really enjoyed listening to it as I've started getting back into the hobby after quite a long break. The thing that I've changed my mind about most recently is contrast paints. I did not like them very much when I first started out, and for the purpose that they are advertised, I'm still on the fence about it. But as a wash or a stain, or Imperial Fists yellow, I believe it's called, over white makes a lovely yellow colour. And yes, I've started to like using them for specific purposes, but always in conjunction with regular paint, which I think is what helps them to really shine. On their own, the slap chop method just doesn't do it for me. Thank you for the pod again, and looking forward to the next episode.
Hi, Matthew. This is Jamie leaving an answer for March's question of the month. The thing I've changed my mind about recently is Patreon. I spotted that Joe McCulloch had launched a Patreon called Games from the Grave. I'm generally not a big fan of the idea of Patreon, but I've heard Joe speak in tens of podcast episodes, and he seems to have a strong philosophy of not just peddling things for the sake of it. And I love his philosophies of just using what you have and doing wargaming on the cheap, basically. So I've given it a try and I've signed up, and I'll probably give it a couple of months to see how it pans out, I guess.
Okay, let's hear from Jason.
So one of the things I've changed my mind on is pertaining to new rule sets. Do I need to buy new rule sets? Well, I think everyone can answer that. You don't need to do anything. But Are new rule sets better? Is it something I would want? Now, I've heard games designers say that new rules are better, they're sleeker, they're all these things. And I have no doubt that from a design point of view, they absolutely are, whatever that means. But there is something in me that does not like learning new rules. I don't like the time it takes. I feel a bit of a headache when I'm having to do it. The constant referencing. I play so few games generally that I get a game every 4 to 6 weeks and 2 big games a year. And I don't readily learn new rule sets under those conditions because I by the time I come round to having played it 2 or 3 times, that's now 4 months in and there's some other game. Now it's Frostgrave, now it's this, now it's whatever. And I'm wondering whether it's like sports. People don't yearn for a new sport if they're into football. They yearn to deepen their own sport and they have their connection through their game. Through football or whatever it is they're into. They don't suddenly go, oh, look, there's tennis. Let's go for tennis. Which would be a curious thing, wouldn't it? However, is it like that for gaming is what I'm questioning. Because I am so much happier when it's a game I already know. I know it intuitively. We're playing it in a different way or perhaps in a different setting or perhaps there's some extra, just a couple of extra things to give it new flavour, new scenario, maybe a new supplement. But I know the core rules intuitively and we're all relaxed. It's all good to go. There's next to nothing to learn and off we crack and off we go. And what's the problem with that? Up to this point, I've been trying to find better rules, new gaming, fun, all this, but it wasn't fun. I kept going back to Warhammer and having more fun. I kept going back to the old games that I used to play. My dungeon game now is Dungeon Saga. I've tried a couple of others and I can't be bothered to learn them. I can't be bothered. There's a massive block in my brain with these things. And it's the same with people as well. If I meet new people, someone in my past has been deleted. I'm sure of it. I met someone 2 months ago in the pub that knew me top to bottom, from school, everything else. Do I remember his name or his face? Not at all. One of the most awkward conversations I've had in many years. And it's the same with learning new rules. I tend to forget some stuff in the past for some reason. And I'm probably just admitting my own genetic failings there or my own shortfall in intelligence. But nonetheless, that is what happens. And the guys I'm playing with are broadly similar. Broadly, apart from one who's just a genius. But everyone hates a genius, especially when they're a likable genius, because what's there to hate then, is there? Nonetheless, is it okay? Why do we need new rules? I've spent ages trying to learn Hail Caesar, Kings of War, and all this. And I get a couple of 3 games into it, and then I stop learning. I have to constantly recheck what I learned last time, because it was 6 weeks ago. And because we can't be bothered to fork out the money for these new things, but also go back over previous ground and waste the time that we've been waiting 6 weeks to get to. We just go back to Warhammer or whatever else, and we have a grand time. There's a pool of 4 or 5 games that we keep picking from the past, and that seems fine. And I'm wondering whether I should just change my mind about new games and go, do you know what? That's fine. There's a new one, but this is my game, and I'm fine with that. Might not be a perfect game. Might not be sleek, whatever that means, but I have fun with it and it's fine. But am I committing a heresy by saying this?
Good morning, Matthew. This is Rob Dean. I guess that I've recently changed my mind about gaming with 6mm figures. I had painted up a bunch of them back in the late 90s and early 2000s, but stopped when they got to be too hard for me to see. Now, later on, I adopted magnification for painting, and why I didn't go back to them at that time, I don't really know. But within the last year or so, I've gotten out some sharp brushes and put on the magnifiers, and found that I really could paint them again after all. In my current circumstances, the tables I have access to are relatively small, no bigger than a 4x6, and putting 50 or 60 25mm figures on there really doesn't look like a battle. If you put down a bunch of 6mm figures on 40mm wide bases, you can have flanks and maneuver, and the whole thing is just a more satisfactory simulation of a battle. On top of that, if I intend to buy more, 6s are easier to store, and relatively inexpensive. I'm not giving up 25s, but 6s are sort of back on the menu at this point. Thanks.
Our question of the month for April 2024 is, have you ever tried to convince a 40k or Age of Sigmar player to play a non-GW miniatures game? If so, what was the response? What game did you play? And crucially, did they enjoy it? I'd love to hear about your own experiences on this front, and you could record your audio feedback by going to bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail. That's bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail. And now, back to the show.
Hi Matthew, Rowan here, a pretty recent subscriber, but I've been really enjoying working my way through all the episodes. The thing that I've recently changed my mind about is scale. I know you'd mentioned 15 mil a few times on back episodes, and I've seen quite a lot of chat on the Discord, and it is not something that I had even remotely considered, and I've completely changed my mind on that. I started looking at alternate armies and various like the Ralpatha and things like that, and I've ordered a few, and it's a great scale. I'm really enjoying painting them, and I've not even played with any yet. But yeah, definitely a complete turnaround for me. Cheers.
Hello, Matthew. Rolf Wounds here, sending you a voice note once again at the last minute. What have I changed my mind about? Very quickly, terrain. I used to think it was boring. I used to think it was dull that you would make rocks and wood out of cork, but now I think it's the best thing. I love it. I love it. Give me mountains, Gandalf.
Hey, Matthew. This is Ryan, Don Wamdon from the Discord. I didn't answer last month's question just because I don't have a ton of interest in the old world, nor a profound reason for not really being interested in it. So I didn't submit anything for that. But this question on, what have you changed your mind on in the hobby really resonated with me, because I feel like I've got something to share here. My philosophy on painting has changed maybe in the last, couple months, maybe 6 months. I started painting just for the sake of painting, versus I think previously I was focused on painting, to get minis on the table. I enjoyed it, but there was always like an end goal in mind. And I think it kind of led to this cycle of, a downward cycle of kind of romanticizing the idea of playing a game, acquiring, what I need to play that game as a 3D printer. This was kind of exacerbated because rules and minis are so readily available that it's not hard to do. It's not like I had to spend a bunch of money at the game store to quote unquote get started. I'd paint them. I wouldn't say I'd hurry, but I'd paint them, paint them with that end in mind. And then ultimately it would kind of lead to a disappointment because I never got them to the table. So I have a large number of, indie games and painted starter squads for games that have never actually been played or just been played by me in solo to kind of test them out. And I think just from a happiness standpoint, that was kind of draining. And it all kind of came to a head and I figured it out. So now I just paint for the sake of painting. I pick a cool model or a couple models and I focus on them till they're done. And if there's a game I want to play, my rule is I've got to have a game night for that game on the calendar with a plan. So that way I know it'll get played and there won't be any, paint for maybe that one day. They'll get played. So yeah, it's been good. It's been really nice. It's been very refreshing. It's kind of had an added bonus of condensing my required materials. Since I'm only painting a model or two, I don't need my full collection of materials, which means that, I can kind of paint anywhere, just because I don't have a ton of setup, which is great. I ended up designing kind of what led me to designing this is my own shameless plug, kind of a portable hobby system where I've got modules that hold paint and brushes and, water cups and the mini itself. And I've got a couple dry palettes and a wet palette and that kind of thing. I can kind of throw everything in there and have it ready to go. So that way, if I want to paint, I can go from, hey, I'd like to paint to actually painting in honestly less than a minute or two, which is really nice. So it's easier to get it done, and sitting down to paint for a while can be a quick thing, rather than an ordeal. Just in general, I found, I need to personally, I have to reduce that activation energy of things that I want to do and increase the activation energy for things I want to avoid. And it kind of naturally steers me down that path. So changing kind of my philosophy has been, like I said, really refreshing and probably the biggest change that I've made. And I've been really happy with it. So great question. Thank you so much. And keep up the great work and the great show. And I'll keep listening.
Hi, Matthew. This is Sam from Austin, Texas, Blood Knight on the Discord. To answer this month's question, I used to think that once you've kind of played a couple of the same type of games, whether it's tabletop, war games or skirmish games or role-playing games, you played one, they're all kind of similar in one way or another. They have a different differences here and there, but for the most part, you're still playing, if you're playing D&D and you played another game that's similar to D&D, you're still playing D&D, as an example. But I think in more recent years, especially since 2020, I've been, trying out different games and playing solo games or co-op games and things like that. And I gotta say, I'm really enjoying all the differences between all these different types of games, even though they would fit in the same category. A role-playing game would fit in, any number of role-playing games would fit in the same category of D&D. However, those subtle differences can make a huge difference. And more recently, one of the games that I picked up is Dragonbane, which is originally a Swedish game. But honestly, after I've tried that game, it's probably my new way to play Dungeons and Dragons. It's the game system is so streamlined, and yet not so streamlined that it's not rules light and it's not too crunchy. It's kind of right in the middle, right down the middle, in the best way that it can be. And the armor on all those technical details work more realistically, and they actually do what they're supposed to do instead of abstract numbers like they would be in D&D. I won't bore you with the details, but I guess I'm saying the thing that I've changed my mind about is that I have not only enjoyed playing all these different games in the same categories, but I've actually really, now I just want to play even more different games. Now I want to pick up even more books and try out different skirmish games and different big battle games. And, so it's kind of like, originally I was, it's almost like not every ice cream flavor is the same. There's so many different flavors of ice cream out there that we need to try, right? So I basically just kind of made things worse for my wallet, by wanting to try out more games, and just enjoying the process along the way. So, but yeah, that's kind of the main thing that I've been doing right now. Just, trying out different games, as many as I can, until I find all my favorites, and I'm having a great time doing it. And thanks for doing the show. I love it. I listened to the recent episode and enjoyed it as always. Look forward to more episodes. Thanks again. Bye.
Right then, there we go. That's our question of the month done and dusted for March 2024. And on to the next one, I guess. And I'm sure this idea came from Ed in the Discord, recent guest on the show. Ed, thanks very much for this. And it's around, have you ever tried to convince a 40k or Age of Sigmar player to play a non-GW miniatures game? Interested to hear how you went about it, if they played a game of something else with you, and what was it like? What did you play? How did the experience go? What was the reception like? I realise that's actually about 20 questions, but they're all themed under that one question umbrella. So yeah, have you ever tried to convince a 40k or Age of Sigmar player to play a non-GW miniatures game? And, tell me the background, tell me all about it, tell me the outcome. And that'll be our question of the month for April 2024. As ever, you could send that audio feedback in by going to bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail. That's bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail. Links in the show notes as well. If you can't get the software to work, some folks that for some reason the button won't appear for them or whatever, you can also email me it. So you could record like a memo on your phone and you could email that to me directly. It's hello@bedroombattlefields.com. Elsewhere, I have recorded a lot of interviews recently, a lot of good conversations, so I'm pretty well stocked up for future episodes right through the next couple of months, I reckon. So, lots of good stuff coming down the pipe. And also, if you have joined me for a conversation on the podcast, don't think that I've forgotten about it because it's not went out yet. It's just that, like I say, I've recorded a lot of stuff. But the good news about that is, it frees me up to do some painting in the evenings as well. So there is that. And one last wee thing I wanted to throw out there was Bring Out Your Lead in early August. I'm pretty certain it's confirmed for the first weekend in August this year. And I'm just curious, to anyone else living in Scotland, would you potentially be interested in car sharing down to the event? Because I'm totally happy to drive, but it's quite a long way to sit in a car on your own as well. And obviously it's a decent amount of petrol you'd need to get there and back. So I am totally happy to take the car and drive, but I'd be really interested to hear from you if you're based in Scotland, particularly the East or Central Belt, and would be up for coming down for the event as well. Right, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Like I say, there's plenty of good stuff coming down the pipeline, so make sure you're subscribed or following on your listening app of choice, and we'll speak again on the next one.